IMHO Talk Show decided to come talk to us about joining in public office once again. Becoming a servant of the people. Not that you ever stop becoming being a servant of the people. I want to say that because I know you've still been around, but to run for Congress again after being away for a few years, what was that process like? What's the maybe the revigorated passion for wanting to be in Congress?
Well, look, it's unfortunately some of it's just out of anger. I mean, we're looking at when I see people getting pushed off of health care, when I see people's wages being cut, when people can't afford groceries for their kids, we've seen electric bills double. People are working not just as hard, they're working twice as hard, and they still can't make it paycheck to paycheck. Mm-hmm. And, 15 years ago, we passed Obamacare. I was happy to vote for that to start to bring those healthcare costs down. Mm-hmm. And when I see John McGuire and Ben Klein and these guys sit there and cast a vote, not just to hurt the poor and the working class in terms of healthcare, mm-hmm. but also the middle class, because all that cost of the uninsured gets moved to the middle class. So, right. My dad got a scholarship to come to UVA, growing up poor in West Virginia. For him, this was the mecca of the American dream. And that meant if you worked hard, played by the rules, you could get your family into an economically secure situation. Mm-hmm. And that dream has been torn to shreds by Trump, by the people around him, and by some of the corporate interests that control Washington. Right. And at a certain point, when I'm in a position to make a difference on that, then I have a moral obligation to try to make a difference on that. And that's why I felt like running for Congress this year was not just a chance to give this area better representation, but to try to get that majority, to get that gavel back in the hands of people who care more about everyday folks than the powerful interests.
Gotcha. So I have to ask this question, and I think this sort of can set the stage, as we go into the actual topics and issues. One thing that I've heard consistently, when we look at our current political climate, is that there's some people that like the raw honesty. Some people believe that we have a government that doesn't work. It may be corrupt in some people's eyes. And so they're like, well, at least Trump is just being who he is and he's not faking for anybody. We hear that, right? And things like that. So I'm curious your take on how we kind of, how can we get the validity back, right? And the honor back to politics when it looks like right now anything goes. You can say anything and get away with it. You can be a felon and be president, right? All that kind of stuff. Right?
Look, I think on some level, Donald Trump has been very clear, both in his words and his actions, that the only thing he cares about is making him and his sons rich. Mm. Like, we are known by our actions, right? And if you look time and again at what he does, what he prioritizes, it is kickbacks for his family. Mm. So if you look at these tariffs, as you know, I had the honor of representing the United States as an international peace negotiator. President Obama asked me to help lead those talks in the Democratic Republic of Congo, later in the Sudan. So I've done these international negotiations, and it's about leverage and it's about priorities. You want to go into those meetings with some leverage over people, and you want to use them to get peace or to secure something in the interest. These tariffs are money out of all of our pockets, stolen out of our pockets, so that Trump has leverage with these countries. Mm-hmm. And what he's using it to do is get another hotel for himself and to get $1 billion of crypto for his sons. So he's very clear, it's out in the open. Mm-hmm. He is using all of us as leverage for his family. Mm-hmm. And we can see that in the negotiations. You have deals with countries where he's been access to high-end artificial intelligence chips that are very important to us. And he sold access to them for $500 million for something that is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Mm. So he is consistent that what he's trying to do is make his family rich at the expense of the American people. Mm. And I think what we're seeing is that the American people are pretty sick and tired of that. And you see that with this war as well. If you look at food prices, right, it already costs crazy amounts of money to go to the grocery store. It's getting more expensive to go out to a restaurant. And that's partly, a lot of that has to do with the tariffs he's done. So China responds, and they cut off a bunch of the fertilizer that our farmers need in order to grow the rest of the food. That's the world. Then he goes and bombs Iran, and they start to blow up the things in Qatar where the rest of the fertilizer is made. So we've seen a doubling in fertilizer prices, which means all of us are going to be paying more for food for a whole nother year. We already feel it at the gas tank, but you're also going to feel it at the grocery store because Donald Trump is out there starting these wars instead of looking out for the American people. And I've been in those rooms. I know how those negotiations work. And I know that we need a fighter for this area that is going to say no to the billions of dollars we're wasting overseas, so that we can put that money towards things like expanding Medicaid, better health care for Americans, better home care for our seniors who are aging and their abilities to age in place. And when we have a government that actually works for the people, then we can try to make that American dream affordable again.
Yeah, thank you for that. Ms. Max?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that you and other people running for office are also faced with, contending with, is just individuals not being hopeful in the vote. And many people are just kind of holding their breath, hoping they can survive this administration and come out on the other end of it. And as you said, this always kind of leads back to money, but how will things ever work for us if those people in power, Trump's constituents, those in his administration, are kind of willing to sell their integrity, even though, they know that the decisions they're making, actions they're taking, are going to impact Trump and his family and give them an advantage there. So what's it worth to us? Why do we vote? Why do we vote for you? And how is it going to change the trickle down, I'd say, especially when we're talking about the low income, impoverished individuals that reside right here in the city of Charlottesville?
All right, so that's like four really important questions. And let's tell two stories that are both true at the same time.
Okay.
The attacks on voting rights under the Trump administration have been horrific. I spent 4 years helping to run organizations in the first Trump administration, trying to oppose those attacks on voting rights, trying to help expand voting rights, including during COVID, when there was a lot of complications of how to vote. And we saw incredible creativity at the community level on how to respond. We see not just the traditional attacks, primarily targeted at the Black community on voting. We now see a SAVE Act that's a way to make it harder for women to vote, particularly divorced women. That's one story, and it's very real. But there's another story we have to remember, which is that elections matter. And because of electing pro-democracy Democrats in Virginia, Virginia now has actually expanded voting rights. And we need to remember the hope side of this equation. So 10 years ago, Virginia had a Jim Crow era limitation on voting. It was extremely difficult. One of the most difficult states in America to vote in, particularly to vote early. With the leadership of Jen McClellan when she was in Richmond, I helped to elect a young, diverse group of delegates back in 2017. There was a series of reforms that now means you have lots of early voting options. That means if Trump and his team try to send ICE to cities to scare people to vote, there's more mail options, there's more early vote options. So we absolutely need to be vigilant, and that's why I've devoted a number of years to trying to fight this voter suppression effort. But we got to keep hope. I was going to say keep hope alive, which I guess is timely. We have to remember that in the context of saying there are positive stories to tell here. People who hold actual power in Richmond who have expanded those voting rights. When we elect, Spanberger and Jay Jones and Hashmi, that means there are people in Richmond who do care about democracy and want that to happen. So on the democracy point, we need to remain vigilant, oppose these efforts. And I think we should be prepared that this fall, Trump may try things that we haven't seen before. There's a second issue here, which is that your listeners right now have an opportunity to vote on a referendum to change our Constitution that is going to level the playing field for the midterm elections. Between early voting is on, it goes till April 21st. Texas, on Trump's direction, rewrote their maps for Congress, and they did two things with that. One, they put almost all the Black and brown people into a few districts so that they would silence better representation for communities of color. And two, they made them highly Republican districts in a way that means Congress might be able to stay in Republican hands, even though a majority of Americans want Congress to change and they want to check on Donald Trump. Virginia's making this move now to level that playing field. It also means we'll have a more competitive district here in Virginia, which means the chances are, again, that voters will have that power to send that signal. So we're seeing Democrats willing to fight back against these attacks on our democracy.
Yep. And can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you have to vote by April 21st, right?
That's correct.
All right. Can you talk more about how that process to vote by April 21st?
Sure. So the General Assembly in Richmond made a decision to send this to the voters. That's very, very important. It's in the hands of the voters. This is not a backroom deal like they tried to do in Texas. If a majority of Virginia before April 21st vote yes on this amendment, we will have the new maps for the midterms, and this area has a much better chance of being well represented, as well as that majority nationally being represented in Congress. There's early during the week, during office hours at the county office building out on 5th Street Extended. There are options to go online and get by mail voting, and then people can vote in person on the 21st. Charlie, you might call up all the things so that we can get that out to the listeners with exact detail. But you've probably seen the advertisements on TV with President Obama urging people to vote yes. This is an important aspect. And if we don't do this, and Texas gets away with rigging the elections and silencing black and brown votes, there's a much better chance we're going to see more states across the South do the same thing after the Supreme Court moves on the Voting Rights Act, as is expected to happen. So it's very important for us to draw a line in the sand now and say we need that level playing field for Congress.
Hey, Razor, before you go that direction, I wanted to elaborate because you mentioned black and brown people. I'm not sure what, where exactly you were going with it, but then I didn't want to lose that point that he just mentioned because a lot of things are very racially charged right now. Like a lot of the decision making is behind that. So one school of thought that's out there is that a lot of what we've seen, like with the rise of Trump, has been backlash to the Obama administration. Like we see how he will try to get rid of affordable health care and then try to do implement the same things, or how get rid of like the nuclear deal with Iran and then say, well, we're trying to fix to make sure that they don't harm the world with nukes. Being that you were so closely intertwined with the Obama administration, I'm curious your take on that, about how we pull back, how we get back to being happy again that we had the first ever, black president. You know what I mean? Instead of it being something where it's like, oh, now America has to be made great again because like these guys messed it all up. You know what I mean? And a lot of that seems racially charged. So I'm curious how do we pull back from this? Some people say it's too late, Tom. I gotta be honest with you. I've heard some people say Trump is taking us so far there's no way we're getting back to center.
Well, first of all, we call Donald Trump reactionary for a reason. Reactionaries are reacting to something. And he was a reaction to progress. He was a reaction to this country finally starting to live up to its creed and aspirations. That was in who we were electing, but also the way we told the American story. We were telling a more accurate history. You saw difficult but long overdue conversations, whether that was the issue of accountability for police violence against particularly young black men, whether that was the monuments we had here in town to Confederate losers who had been enslavers and part of an evil cause, still being celebrated today. These were useful conversations, and I think most Americans looked at that and said, this is good that we are moving forward and being a more beloved community that takes more seriously equality under the law for all. Trump was a reaction to that. I think it is true that the first time he won, there was a sense of that being a temporary setback. And I don't think there's any sugarcoating that the second time he won, it felt more like maybe this is just who we are.
Yeah.
But you got to look at that globally. When he won the second time, incumbents all over the world were losing. Right-wing incumbents were losing, left-wing incumbents were losing. There was a post-COVID hangover on inflation that was seen globally across that. And Trump, as he's often done, rides waves that he hasn't created to his own maximum self-enrichment. And I think what we've seen in the last year is the vast majority of Americans do not like what Trump's doing. They do not think he's doing a good job. They do not like the idea of mass federal agents coming into our cities with impunity and shooting Americans and killing moms. People do not like the prices going through the roof, and they do not like this war. So I think it is very important for us not to internalize the idea that somehow, this country is headed back to that vision. I think this remains a difficult transition to a more just and inclusive and historically accurate America. I think there's some things that are also bigger than Trump, which we'll probably come back to, which is if you look at artificial intelligence and the way that it could threaten jobs across a whole bunch of sectors, that's not Trump's fault. Trump is just the thing standing in the way of our country having a smart approach to say, how are we going to help people transition into this new economy? And so the tragedy of Trump isn't just the division he creates and money that he wastes bankrupting the country. It's also wasting time our country doesn't have to be coming together for better solutions of how we're going to build into this. And I will say something that transcends race. I mean, I happened to see a clip of Obama at the National Correspondence Center the other day, and it was just nice to have a president who spoke in complete sentences. It was nice to have a president who, when he stood in front of a microphone, I wasn't worried about what he might say the next second. And that was sometimes true of, President Biden as well. We had not just the first black president, we just had a man of discipline, a man of substance. And you don't have to agree with him on every issue to feel like the country was in good hands. If you talked about the Iran deal and people, on the right gave him some grief for some sanction relief to Iran as part of that deal. But it was a small amount of relief that was in exchange for them setting back their nuclear program and preventing a war. Trump just gave 10 times as many concessions to Iran and got nothing for it. He's already got a war, and it had no impact on the nuclear program. He's just giving them the money. So you think about the difference between, for all the art of the deal stuff, Trump doesn't know how to negotiate his way out of a paper bag. And, President Obama, whether it was the healthcare system at home, very complicated. He had the guts to take that on. Whether it was something like an Iran nuclear deal, very complicated, had the guts to take that on. And so I think that, that's going to age well in terms of what it means to have someone of substance and discipline, in the job. So I do believe there's reason to have hope. I think the difference in my life running now versus before is before I thought it was almost predestined that the arc of history would bend towards justice. It's just the nature of the country. The nature of history will be. I don't believe that anymore. I believe it's a choice. I believe it's a question for each generation of whether we step up and say, not on our watch, we're not going backwards. On our watch, we're going forward. A couple of weeks ago was the 61st, I think, anniversary of the Selma March. When those guys got up, and I should say women, because a lot of it was women-led, they knew they were going to take a beating that day. They knew what was waiting for them on the then named Edmund Pettus Bridge. And they said, we are going to march there because we are going to demand that the arc of history go a different way. It wasn't passive. It was active. And I think right now, that's probably what's been most inspiring to me on the campaign trail is hearing from people who are working in their community to help families that have been torn apart by ICE, people who are finding a way to help those who become unhoused because they couldn't afford their electric bills. It is horrific that John McGuire and Ben Klein are kicking people while they're down, but our community is still responding. People find a way to help neighbors, and they find a way to fight back. So I think we need to find that hope that doesn't come from a probability. It comes from ancestors. It comes from a deeper faith space. That's what I think we're up against right now. And I can tell you, the more time I spend with people, the more hopeful I get. The more time I spend with pundits, the more I want to punch myself in the face. So I think we just got to tune out some of the news and the punditry and actually remember that in our communities, people want an inclusive space and they want to build that sense of unity.
So you said inclusive, and Ray, I know you got something. So diversity, equity, inclusion is something that I heard you mention, you allude to, and Governor Spanberger, when she was on, realizes the importance of it as well and how it's part of the nation's fabric to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. That's not a bad thing. But with the federal government that we have still in place, how do you see navigating that? Like even if within Virginia, we want to make sure that all feel included and welcome. But the federal government is saying, well, University of Virginia, you're not going to get that money unless you remove these programs. You don't let these student groups exist. Those kind of things. Like, how can we dance around all that, as a state?
Yeah, we don't dance.
Okay.
We stand. I think we take a stand and say, which of these things do you not like? Do you not like diversity? Do you not like equity? Or do you not like inclusion? And stop creating a straw man argument that you want to argue against. Tell us what your problem with the system is. And if there is a legitimate problem of some reason, then that can be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we've seen, this is not some left-wing agenda. This is something we've seen in corporate America and other spaces that, when you have these programs, you get better candidates, you get a better work environment, you get a more interesting space to be. And it's not just code for jobs for Black people. These are programs that have helped veterans. It's helped rural people based on class, people from different backgrounds. And, what I see across the Blue Ridge is people want to be in communities of diversity. I mean, you look at a place like Harrisonburg, where James Madison is. You also have the Mennonite community there, and they've been relocating refugee and asylum seekers for 40 years. I have friends I know from Congo and from Afghanistan there, and it makes it a more interesting and vibrant community. So I think it's important for us not to back down from articulating that image of a beloved community that we want. I also think it's important to win. The day after, not just Vanberger, but also Jay Jones took office, it affects that university because the general counsel at the university answers to the attorney general. And it was Jason Miyares who cost this area tens of millions of dollars. Youngkin likes to talk about his tax plan. It was effectively a huge tax hike to give this guy the golden parachute, to cost this research and development money. And that's what they were going after. They were going after research into diseases, research in innovation and technology. And anyone who thinks this was actually about DEI or actually about anti-Semitism, look, this community does not need to be told that violent anti-Semitism is a problem.
Right.
I was in the streets on that August day when we had neo-Nazis here facing off against these guys. That is a very real and present threat, and we stood strong as a community, Black, brown, and white, against that invasion from hate groups. So let's take that part seriously. But let's let our institutions of higher learning be strong institutions of higher learning.
Agreed.
And that part of that's going to be by making sure it's a diverse and inclusive space.
Agreed.
I'm going to take the interview in a little different direction. Generally, politicians are always saying how they want to help the families. By you representing Virginia, are there certain issues that are like death to a campaign? So let's say, for instance, if we were to take like the JDR system, when it comes to family court or child support, whether it's a custodial or non-custodial parent, it seems that no politician really, if they want to help the American family, they would put more of a mandate or restraints on how the court system handles the money that transfers from one parent to another, especially if you expect the child to have a good life living from one parent to the next. So my question would be, are there any subjects that really politicians don't like to tackle when it comes to statewide stuff, even though they're always saying that they want to help the Virginia families or the American families? But if we're starting with the American families, we're starting with the finances in there, not just the groceries or the gas, but actually how the money is transferring from the broken households that we have inside of Virginia.
Look, let me come at that a couple different ways. So one, a lot of the JDR issues are at the state level, not the federal level. So I'll still speak to them, but this is really at the congressional level. Two, I think on judicial reform more generally, before we get into the custodial issue, I think what you've seen is even with this question of whether we've moved backwards or not, while there's been a backlash rhetorically to some of the focus on criminal justice reform of a few years ago, of moving from a highly over-incarcerated approach to decriminalization of some issues like marijuana and moving away from the sort of mandatory minimum approach. If you look at the polling on the issue, it actually is still quite popular, even with Republicans, to be looking at a more intelligent and compassionate approach to justice in these situations. You've seen more prosecutors willing to use their discretion in more cases. And I think that's for a variety of reasons, including how many more families across racial lines have been impacted by, time spent in the criminal justice system in one form or another. So I think overall that augurs for people wanting to take, giving some flexibility there. And the flexibility there is where I'll come to your issue. And I honestly don't have a great answer for you on the substance of it.
Okay. What
I can tell you is on the federal policy level, what is difficult is where you are trying to write a law for all scenarios, right? Mm-hmm. And particularly in family court matters and custodial matters, there's an enormous amount of a judgment call that judge is making. And so, or the judicial advocate or whoever is involved in that particular process. So I think one of the challenges is when you're trying to set a law for an entire country, you then either need to write it in a way that gives people a lot of flexibility, but that leaves room for that individual potentially to abuse that or make bad discretionary calls, or you're trying to make a really very clear bright line rule at the federal level, which then means that individual arbiter or whoever's involved in that court is not able to look at the situation and say, well, but in this case, this really doesn't make sense here because this about the father or the others or the rest. So having not worked in that space, I don't think I can give you a better answer on the specifics. What I can tell you is that I think, we had swung from a lot of discretion through the 80s and 90s to these very draconian mandatory sentencing directions from the federal government back to the issue of saying perhaps there should be some room for second chances and the rest in other areas. But I'm not going to be able to give you a better direct answer on that.
I can respect that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
go ahead.
So we are talking to Virginia in its 5th district, right?
So it's a good question.
Yeah.
In 2010, we lost that by a few points. Currently, I'm running in the current 5th district and the proposed 6th district. So this comes back to this constitutional.
So that vote's going to make a big difference. Okay.
Yeah, well, about half the district's the same, really. In both districts, you have Charlottesville, Albemarle, Fluvanna, Nelson, and then you have, Lynchburg, Amherst, Bedford areas. And so in the current 5th, that district continues down to south side, to Danville, Halifax, South Boston, over to Goochland. In the new district, it goes west to Waynesboro, Stanton, and Harrisonburg, and then Roanoke, Salem, Blacksburg, and Radford. So it's more the small towns of the Blue Ridge with the Piedmont, or the Piedmont plus South Side. So slightly different districts. I love both of them. And, the Blue Ridge is where I grew up hiking, camping in those woods. I've worked on opposing natural gas pipelines and fighting for a living wage in those areas. In Southside, had the honor to represent that area, for a couple of years and helped to expand rural broadband access and rural healthcare options. And as I've said to folks there, if the district line changes, my values don't. My commitment to working class folks and everyone else is going to remain. And if you look right now, for example, in Harrisonburg, I won't represent a lot of Rockingham County, but I've still been meeting with farmers in those areas because many of the people that live in Harrisonburg work on those farms. Their kids are in the Harrisonburg schools. Their farms affect the economy of the area. So I'm going to care about those folks, even if they're a little bit across an artificial line, both because they're humans of equal dignity and worth, and because we are in this together. And I think we need to understand that in the same way that when these guys cut off, the Medicaid expansion, we see rural health clinics closing. And then we were meeting with these rescue squad workers in Harrisonburg a few weeks ago, and their call volume has tripled once the rural health clinics have closed, because the only way people can get to the hospital is with the rescue squad. They're waiting till they get super sick. So then we're clogging up the rescue squads, we're clogging up the ERs, we're getting longer wait times in the ER. And all of that cost of the uninsured comes back to all of us through higher premiums, because the insurance companies in the hospital aren't going to take a loss. They're going to spread that over to the middle class and to small business owners. And that's where Ben Klein and McGuire and this corrupt Congress came in again and said, then we're also going to cut the tax credits, the healthcare tax credits for the middle class and small business. So they're hitting you once by pushing off the most vulnerable and hitting you again in the middle class. And why? So that Elon Musk could get a $300,000 tax credit he's not even going to feel.
Right.
But people sure feel these cuts.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are talking to 5th, maybe 6th Congressional District hopeful Tom Perriello. But either way, get out and vote, right? So you get out and vote by April 21st, and got to make sure that we vote in every election. It's very important. It does matter. It does matter, people.
It is going to make my football season complicated. So right now in the brackets, the winner has Tech, JMU, and UVA. The men's bracket, I think, is just UVA of the colleges that are in the district.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
See how it goes.
Yeah. So go Who's. But we do have a question online for you, and we want to, we want to make sure that you feel like that you tackle what you feel like are the major issues that you would want our listening audience to make sure that they're aware of. When it comes to ultimately deciding whether they vote for you. But we do have a question that says, federal law under the IDEA promises support for students with disability. I'm sorry, federal law under the IDEA promises support for students with disabilities, but it has never fully funded. What specific steps will you take in Congress to increase federal IDEA funding so Virginia schools aren't forced to rely so heavily on local budgets? And what will you do at the federal level to address shortages of special education teachers, support staff, especially in high-need districts?
So the first thing is to look at what I've already done. So when I got to Congress and we were facing a possible depression, right? We just had the Wall Street had fallen apart. The housing crisis was on. That first stimulus act we actually had on President Obama's desk before he was even sworn in. A huge chunk of that was plus up funding into localities for public education, including Title I funding and other special needs funding. We then came back and did a supplemental funding later that year to support our public schools. I was a proud product of 10 years in the Albemarle County school system. It was a huge part of what made me who I am. We are blessed to have strong schools here, but we would love to see them even stronger with more funding. That's got to include our ability to train, attract, and retain teachers, including in special ed and special needs areas and the IEP program. So that is something that I will continue to push for at the federal level, including stronger funding there. What I've been trying to do throughout the district is meet with local officials. Because this isn't my first rodeo, I know that one of the most valuable things I can do is meet with local electeds to say, what do you need from the federal government? How can I be a federal advocate? How can I be a pit bull for you in the federal government? Because in the original Constitution, the House was the only office directly elected by the people. Yes, it was landowning white men. And even within that, the Senate was elected by the state legislature, the president by the Electoral College. So this has really been the people's house. It was always meant to be the closest thing you have to a local representative to the federal government. And I take that very seriously, of wanting to be present to know what the schools need, what our economic development planners need, what is going to help keep our health clinics open, in addition to standing up and fiercely resisting Trump's attacks on our Constitution and attacks on our communities. I want to also be a proactive advocate of looking for federal grant funding, looking for where we can have greater flexibility. In one of the communities in the Blue Ridge, we were looking at flexibility with Section 8 vouchers, where it's a good program. I've supported it. But if you get a little bit of a raise at work, it immediately gets cut out of your Section 8 voucher, which discourages people from moving up the work chain in some cases. Where can we find a way that doesn't punish people for starting to get that raise at work and actually helps them instead be saving up a little bit to possibly buy a home or move into, a different kind of apartment? That's the kind of thing that I want to be doing, like the IDEA programs, where you say, okay, tell me where the gap is here and let me go and try to solve it.
Gotcha.
A question. So, in my opinion, right after the question of why do individuals? I mean, why do votes matter? Why should my vote count? And why do I need to get out in this next election? I think the next thing on people's minds is, I'm tired of surviving. I am tired of living day to day. I'm tired of always having more bills than I have money, and just want to enjoy life, right? And some of that is left up to personal decisions. Others of it is left up to what people on the Hill and individuals like yourself running for Congress, the decisions and the things that they're advocating for on in others' behalf. And so my question to you is that how you plan to prioritize and take and advocate for higher wages, affordable housing, and lower child care.
Better health care.
Yeah.
Better health care.
Yeah.
Affordable health care.
Right? Universal health care.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I love it. Yeah.
So one of the things that I've tried to do in my life, so I spent most of my life running nonprofit organizations. I spent a little bit, in Congress, spent a little as a peace negotiator overseas. What I always try to do is define first what success looks like and work backwards from that instead of working up from where people are. So 20 years ago, a little less than 20 years ago, I was an early advocate for moving to a $15 an hour minimum wage, which isn't as much as it was then, and that was considered radical then. But the reason was we kept saying to people, hey, you need to get off this welfare program and go to work. But we had a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour.
Yeah.
People were literally losing money by going to work. So if we want people to work, the question was, well, let's start with what is a job that would pay enough money that then that person could actually, that single mom could actually take that job. And at the time, 15 was considered, an outlier, but it at least solved the problem. And part of that was because I kept hearing from Democrats, oh, well, we can't do that, but we can move from $7.25 to $8.25 an hour. I'm like, I'll support that, but that's not going to change someone's life, right? That's not something that's going to say, now I can afford to pay my bills this month. So why don't we actually try to fight for a solution that could mean people might be able to get out of debt? They might be able to pay their bills that month. That was the 15 an hour. Same thing with healthcare. While I'm, voted for Obamacare, I was proud to vote for the first version that included a public option and included a Medicare buy-in option. And part of that, and I was quite a bit younger than the rest of Congress when I voted for it, I've been on Obamacare 4 times since I voted for it. And that's because I knew my generation, we weren't going to go work for one company out of high school or college for 40 years with one insurance thing and then retire on Medicare. I was going to be in and out of lots of different jobs, as I have been. So the exchange said what would change my life is if there's always a place I can go to buy affordable care. I was talking to a woman yesterday whose brother said, I'd been stuck in a dead-end service job. He'd always dreamed of starting a martial arts studio. And he said it was the Affordable Care Act that let him do that because he knew he wasn't stuck in that job for his health care. He could go do the things he'd always dreamed of doing, and he's now become a successful small business owner. And health care shouldn't be the limiting factor for that. So let's get people universal health care. We come back to the artificial intelligence thing. Right now, we are competing not against immigrants. Immigrants aren't taking our jobs. Robots are taking our jobs. And right now, if the cost for a worker, if I'm a business owner and I want to hire a worker, the wages I pay that worker is probably only half of the cost of that worker between the way we tax labor and healthcare costs and other things. And then the robot over here doesn't need healthcare. So we need to be looking at systems that aren't disproportionately making it less likely we're going to give the job to the human. So we need to move that healthcare cost off of the employer, which is better for the person because then they don't have to stress about the fact of whether they're going to have healthcare or not. So what I think we need to do more of in this situation is start with what solves the problem. What's going to mean that you can exhale at night with a bit of economic security? That means more debt-free pathways into the trades, apprenticeship programs at community colleges, something I fought for wearing a few different hats. Universal pre-K can be a step towards that. These are all programs that make it a little easier for people to believe they are going to be able to provide that basic economic security and brighter future to their kids.
Awesome. Mr. Perriello,
yes, sir.
Thank you for joining us. We are up against time, but I feel like this is a very fruitful conversation. I feel like we covered a gamut, and we hope to have you back. Please don't be a stranger.
I would love to come back in with some additional questions. let us know and we'll circle back. But it's an honor to be here.
Charlie, we got your contact, Charlie. All right, we're going to be in touch. Ms. Max, you good?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Perriello, for joining us. Appreciate the conversation. We look forward to having you back, and best of luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.